everybody, really glad to be here. Here I'm going to talk to you guys about how my team has deployed a fork of Bootstrap for our internal site. Great. So here's the story of how Airbnb and Bootstrap began their romance back in 2012. So this was the first version of Airbnb back in 2008, written by an engineer on a couch somewhere. Back then the name was still called Air Bed and Breakfast. And over the past 6 years, the site has just grown a lot. And this is a screenshot from 2012. You can observe many elements of that archaic period, such as raster icons, raster buttons, localized images, and tons of custom CSS. And over time, it just grew more and more. Here's a super custom design for this site called Wishlist, featuring Ashton Kutcher. And this is what the CSS looked like at that point in time. Not a very proud moment for me to be looking at this CSS. So at this point in 2012, my teammate Horace said, why don't we use one of the CSS frameworks out there? Because it just didn't make sense for us to have so much custom CSS. So then we started rolling out O2, which was Airbnb flavored Bootstrap. Basically, just Bootstrap with custom colors using the inbuilt customizations. And we called it O2, which is short from oxygen, because you can't have Airbnb without O2. So here's an example of, yeah. We are a very punny company for some reason. So this is what this looked like before, just having a ton of different buttons with inconsistent looks, different sizes, text treatments, button padding, and glossiness. And afterwards, it was just nailed down to a set of elements, according to Bootstrap with some of our own spin on it from the colors. And so this is what the site looked like after we snapped to O2 in 2012. Using an icon font, CSS buttons, getting all the nasty localized raster images out, and having less custom CSS. And here's another example of our search page back in 2012. Looks pretty much the same today, with the exception of the colors. And here's another random page called our hosting page. It's in Korean, because I just wanted to show what it looks like in Korean. And so at that point, Bootstrap worked really well for us because we had just so much custom CSS we wanted to get rid of, and it allowed us to have an out-of-the-box solution that was consistent, allowed for rapid development, performance, and reliability. And at the time, the entire team was maybe about 30 developers across all the different teams. And so for 1 year, we focused on rolling this out. So in the first quarter of 2012, we started working on rolling it out to booking flow. Then we rolled it out for the rest of the site, including other standalone features. And then in March 2013, we had rolled it out to most of the main flow. And about then was when I actually joined the company, and our romance with Bootstrap kind of came to trouble in paradise. So if you ask anyone today why they don't use Bootstrap, they're probably going to tell you one of these reasons. And this is actually a slide that I pulled from Harry Roberts' presentation. I heard he's here today, so I'm really nervous because I'm using his slide. It's called fair use, so please don't sue me. So the reasons why somebody might not like Bootstrap would be it's too bloated, it's too specialized, it's too opinionated, and basically they just get in your way. And back on this, those are perfectly enumerating the reasons why we chose to move away from Bootstrap at that point in 2013. So here's an example of a page that we had, the Korean page. And it pretty much contains every Bootstrap component, from the header to the fancy input drop-downs to all the different button colors, and pretty much like everything in the junk bucket. And here's what Bootstrap looked like at this point. Tons and tons of different components, all kinds of drop-downs and custom jQuery components. So together with design, we started working on a newer, simpler O2 that focused mainly on the elements that we wanted and got rid of all the extra stuff. And rewriting O2 for us was a necessary leap of faith because forking a code base is always a risky proposition, but we thought it would be better to just cow down to what we needed rather than have all this extra stuff in the code base that would just slowly rot and cause a lot of maintenance difficulties. And so we rolled this out in the course of about a year from the beginning of 2013 when I joined to the end of 2013. And so over this process, we had learned a number of lessons. So I guess I have to preface this by saying that I'm not the world's greatest CSS expert. My team kind of just came to this process because we wanted to fix a CSS problem. So a lot of these issues kind of just surfaced over time. So one example is, one of the great benefits of this process was being able to get away from the Bootstrap conventions where it didn't really work for us. So I don't know anyone who actually likes the Bootstrap navbar. And I say this not as to like impinge upon Bootstrap reputation, but it's 922 lines with 42 different people working on it. And it just doesn't really work for most of your navigation needs unless you want to look you have the exact same structure as them. And this process of rewriting our CSS allowed us the flexibility of moving away from the Bootstrap conventions, being able to define our own styles and going towards a more easier, better markup that was easier to override. But one thing that we discovered throughout this process is that versioning a UI framework is really difficult. Understatement of the year. I know it's only March, but I hope that it will remain true to December. So a lot of people have complained about how difficult Bootstrap is to upgrade from version 2 to version 2. Like this is a talk that Pamela Fox gave entitled "When Bootstrap Attacks," complaining about how difficult it was to upgrading Khan Academy from Bootstrap 2 to Bootstrap 3. But I would say that this is generally true of all CSS frameworks. CSS changes often manifest in subtle, hard to discover ways. Nobody writes CSS perfectly the first time, and you always want to make changes to it. And being able to have your own control over your versioning and your releases, it's kind of like a gun because you can either use it for good or accidentally shoot yourself in the foot. One of the things that we discovered over the past couple of years is that we rewrote our modal API, like how modals are displayed, and we recently discovered that the approach that we use doesn't quite work on iPad, so we decided to make a change to how which layer it's rendered on, showing it via display, by toggling the display rather than changing the z-index, and we've discovered that it kind of breaks different modals throughout the site. And this is complicated by having to support multiple browsers. I found this image when I Googled bugs and cross-browser compatibility. I think it's kind of funny because it includes bugs on all the different browsers, and that's actually something that I found. It's not just IE8 that you have to contend with, but Firefox or Chrome, they all have their different rendering bugs. And the benefit of using the Twitter Bootstrap library is that it's all very well tested, battle tested. Like they have a well set up infrastructure to run your tests. This is a screen. This is whenever you open a pull request for Bootstrap, it actually runs a set of Travis tests, including screenshots via source labs, to show if there's any visual differences. And that's something that can be really valuable for CSS changes, just because it can be difficult to know what kind of changes you have. Whenever I like to talk about CSS, I always go back to this quote by Michael Fetter saying that legacy code is untested code. 99% of the time when we write CSS, we don't test it. So I'll say that most CSS is legacy code, flip table. And going back to the point about versioning and downstream impacts of CSS changes, while upgrading Bootstrap is difficult, it's by and large a known process because there are hundreds and thousands of people throughout the world that have been battle testing it, and if you look at the docs, it's really well fleshed out, and not to mention the fact that there are people working full-time on the project that have spent a lot of time thinking about it. On the other hand, when you upgrade the internal framework, it's really hard to test comprehensively, and I say that as somebody that our team really tries to minimize the impact of any CSS changes by doing some cursory testing, but there's always so many edge cases when people may abuse UI components so that you can't test all those cases, and when you release a breaking change, it breaks something. I guess that sounds kind of silly, but I guess what I meant was when you release a change that you don't expect to have any downstream impacts, that it breaks something inadvertently. And the main benefit in general, the main benefit of the Twitter Bootstrap community is just that it's just very well tested. It has it's very well fleshed out in terms of accessibility, documentation, and it's well tested in a cross-browser way. So accessibility is something that I wish that we could all do better with. So I actually looked at the Twitter Bootstrap repo to pull the number of improvements that they had for accessibility, like ARIA attributes, etc. And they had a grand total of 80 tickets. I think maybe if you count up all the tickets that we have for O2, it's also about 80. So that's something where Twitter Bootstrap is really well tested for. Documentation, another great example where the economies of scale come into play. Here's our documentation. We actually just did a rewrite of it to cover all the different components, but we don't really go into detail on how to use it or any gotchas, which Twitter Bootstrap has. And in general, a lot of problems have already been solved by Bootstrap. And some of those cases, by running a Bootstrap fork, you can utilize that knowledge, but other times you don't know that it's already been solved by them unless you're a Mark Auto or you do an intensive search on that. So one example is how to deal with user-generated content where it breaks the panel. We were trying to make that decision whether we should have containers break words by default to prevent user-generated content from overflowing it. And one of my team members proposed that we break it. And so I thought, shouldn't Bootstrap already thought over this and come to an answer? And I searched on the Bootstrap GitHub, and they had already come to that conclusion that it wasn't a good idea. And by maintaining your own CSS framework, you kind of take on that burden of thinking over all the nuances and the pros and the cons based on user experience, while it's already been solved by Bootstrap. In other cases, you can leverage the expertise that Bootstrap has, such as in responsive approaches. So because we base our code base partly on Bootstrap, we were able to utilize their grid framework and just pull it in for ease of use. So another thing I want to talk about maintaining one benefit for us of maintaining our own style guide was that it made our rebrand really difficult. Not really difficult, really easy. Really put my foot in my mouth in that one. So we had to at the beginning of last year, the CEO and a bunch of other people, designers and people like that, decided that we needed to rebrand the site. And because we already had put the entire site on our O2, it made it very easy to apply changes. So we did so by snapping all non-O2 pages to O2, making the minimal markup changes, and it was done. So an example of this was on the left, it's what the style guide looked like before the rebrand, and on the right is with the new skin. And by applying this throughout the site, it made it really easy to make it look good with minimal CSS changes. So here's some of the quote-unquote fun pages in our site, which basically means one of the thousands of pages that got added in the past few years that aren't necessarily that glamorous. Like this one is the guidebook. I don't know if any of you guys know that, but we actually have a feature that allows hosts to add their points of interest to a map, and it will show up as a nicely formatted list for guests. Here's another one, being able to alter your reservation before and after. And this is what it looks like in a rebrand. So the next thing I want to talk about is how we maintain O2 in a world where designs are constantly changing. So one of the things about making a style guide is that it's only as valuable as it's up to date, and keeping it in sync with design policies is necessary. Otherwise, it just becomes useless. And that's something that's been really challenging for us because the design of the site just keeps evolving as we expand. And that's probably something where I feel jealous of people who are working with brands that have a known presence, because it doesn't just keep changing. But I think that there are important lessons that we can learn from here. So we work with design to keep our O2 in sync with their needs by having them maintain a PSD file that has the same components as us. And so this is what the PSD kind of looks like with the alignment, and then here's more components. This is basically what their PSD looks like, and it just mirrors the components that we have in CSS. And by doing that, it allows them to produce mocks that are exactly to spec according to the O2 spec. And we are working on getting a sketch template so that designers who work in Sketch can use it as well. Another thing that we have implemented is a build process, making it easier to update and version that. So I think that's probably something where it makes it very easy on the developers front. So we use an internal instance of npm, and then you can install, and O2 is released as an npm package, so that it can just be installed via npm. And we version it semantically so that breaking changes are easily found, and we use Sinopia to run a private npm server. So that's pretty much all I have for you about O2. Thanks for hearing me talk. Yeah.